Okay, so let's get going. So some of you heard a bit of the intro. Let's go. Fine. So I'm introducing the bird study group tonight. Jackson, unfortunately, is stuck in traffic in Dundas, not able to get to here on time. I was just talking with him, so he's not. He may be hopefully by the end of the talk be able to close it out, but not for the intro, unfortunately. So um, we're really fortunate to have Mandelbaum, excuse me, if I can get that right. Um, from the Finch Research Network in New York City to talk about North America's crossbills. So you can, I'm not going to read this whole thing out, but you can see this is what's going to be covered, and this is on the site, so you know the idea behind it. So I just need to do the acknowledgement statement. So we recognize and acknowledge that we meet on traditional territories of Mississauga, the New Credit, and Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the dish with one spoon wampum agreement. I apologize, it's not the full one. That's the one I can get the quickest right now. So without further ado, Ryan's going to take over and talk about finches. All yours,
Awesome.
Ryan.
Yeah, thanks so much for the intro. So I'll go ahead
Oh,
and share my screen so you can see my presentation. Just give me a second. All right. So this presentation is called Get to Know Eastern North America's Crossbills. I'll be giving you all a walkthrough of the crossbills that you might see while you're birding out in Ontario, and give a bit about the ecology and then some of the mysteries that are arising with even with our local crossbills. So to start, my name is Ryan Mandelbaum. I am a science writer and naturalist based in Brooklyn in New York City. I'll be giving this talk on behalf of the Finch Research Network, but I volunteer my writing and my bird guiding abilities to a bunch of organizations across New York State. That includes New York City Audubon, where I'm a naturalist and educator, the New York Breeding Bird Atlas Communications Committee, and then I have my own list of writing that I do. You can find it on that link there. And then I'm a nature photographer and a social media addict. And then I've written about birds for outlets like Gizmodo, Audubon Magazine, and the New York Times. And then in my full-time job, I actually work at IBM. So what is the Finch Research Network? Before I get started about crossbills. So FERN, as we call it, is a nonprofit that is devoted to the study of conservation of finches globally. Now, Fern was founded in 2020 in order to build a network of finch enthusiasts, as well as to support finch conservation and science more globally. Finches, there's a number of threatened finches, especially the Hawaiian honeycreepers, for example. We like to think of this work as continuing on the work of British ornithologist Ian Newton and Canadian ecologist Ron Pittaway, who I'm sure many of you have heard of, who began the winter finch forecast. And now today, the Finch Research Network is most famous for being the home of the annual winter finch forecast, which again was started by Ron Pittaway and is now run by Tyler Hoare, who I believe has actually come to speak with this group as well. So I definitely encourage you to check us out at finchnetwork.org. You can see that written down on the bottom right. That's finchnetwork.org. You can learn about how you can get involved or donate. And you can also sign up to the newsletter, which I write for them. So let's jump into the topic of the talk, which is the crossbill. So we have two species of crossbills here in eastern United States, the red crossbill and the white-winged crossbill. The ecology of the red crossbill is slightly more complex, so the talk is mostly going to focus on the red crossbill. But just generally, crossbill is a big-headed finch that specializes in eating the seeds out of conifer trees. They use that uniquely shaped bill with its crossed mandibles in order to extract the seeds out from those pine scales, like you see this bird doing here. And they're actually so tied to the cones of conifer trees that they will even feed full conifer seeds to their young, which I think is pretty neat. And I wanted to just do a quick video, which Tom Johnson took in New Jersey, just to show you how these birds do it. I think this is a pretty amazing shot worth doing. Just give me 1 second. So here's a red crossbill, and you can see how it's going to put its face into these scales and use its beak almost like a pair of forceps to spread those scales. And then it takes its tongue and takes the little sort of paper covered seed outside from inside of the cone. And then it presses the seed against its palate and then maneuvers it in its mouth to get rid of that seed covering and eat the little pine seed out from inside. And then for those of you who are interested, we'll be talking quite a bit about pine trees and conifer trees in a moment. But that bird specifically was feeding on a Japanese black pine, which is a common pine here in the eastern United States, an introduced pine. Cool. So do you see my PowerPoint? No. There we go. So this is a red crossbill. This is a female red crossbill. Again, this bird is on Japanese black pine. And then we can compare the red crossbill, which I've been showing you photos of, to the white-winged crossbill. So the white-winged crossbill is more of a boreal specialty, and they have a smaller beak built for feeding out of these smaller coned conifers, especially spruces in the boreal forest. For these white-winged crossbills, the males are this more pink color. The females you'll see are more gray-yellow, but most importantly, the white-winged crossbills have these black wings with the white wing bars. And I have a little comparison shot for you here, where red crossbills are more of a sort of reddish orange. Some of them, even males, will be yellow. Female red crossbills will be a gray yellow, like the bird I showed before. And then brown wings on the red crossbill. And then the white wing crossbill, again, to compare, you see that bird is a pink bird with black wings and a white wing bar. And then the white wing crossbill also has some a different marking and a slightly smaller beak, but that can depend on the specifics, and we'll get into that. So I think one of the most important things, and one of the things people know the best about crossbills is that they're nomadic. So they travel in these flocks that move around based on the availability of food. Cones are not always a reliable food resource, and many conifers will produce cones on a 2-year cycle. So what that means is that the conifers will actually have to move around to find a store of cones that they'll be able to support and raise young with. So when they do find a good crop, that's when they'll settle down and breed. And because of that, sometimes birds will find a good cone crop even in the dead of winter. Here in New York State, we have records of crossbills even from just last year breeding in January and into February. But now if, say, there's no cone crops available in these bad cone years, then the crossbills will actually travel even further afield, sometimes showing up in surprising places. So actually, I love this picture on the right. This is a drawing by the British chronicler Matthew Paris from 1254, who documented an eruption of crossbills into the United Kingdom. And here he describes seeing the birds biting into apples to eat the seeds out. I don't think they were actually apple the fruit. I think that might be a mistranslation. But even in 1254, they were documenting these eruptions of crossbills. But this nomadic nature of crossbills actually introduces a sort of interesting kink to our understanding of their taxonomy. And what that is that this traditional definition of a subspecies doesn't really work on a crossbill. And the reason is because when we talk about subspecies, say on the left, I have the map of the fox sparrow's subspecies. Subspecies are usually tied to a geographic area. Now, crossbills aren't tied down to geographic areas. They travel far and wide. But they still do have these differing populations that have their own clear evolutionary differences. And so they still are differentiating in the way that a subspecies for these fox sparrows, for example, work, but just works differently in crossbills. So what happened was groundbreaking work a few decades ago by biologist Jeff Groth showed that we can group these crossbills into these subspecies like call types, which is what we call them, and that you can tell them apart by two things. The first is the shapes of their beak and the flight calls that they use to communicate with one another. So I think there's a number of experienced birders on this. I unfortunately couldn't get my audio to work, but the sound that a crossbill makes, it's sort of like a kip, 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 kip. And the specifics and the sort of tone and timbre is what differs. So even though it might sound the same between the different call types, if you record them, then you're able to tell them apart. So there are right now 11 and soon to be 12 red crossbill call types in the United States and Canada, as well as so in North America, also including Mexico. And what I've done here is I've presented a spectrogram of each of the 12 types. I'm not going to talk about all 12 of the types. But just note that what we're looking at here is a graph of the frequency. So that's the the note essentially of the Crossbill's call type, and then that's time. So it's the shape of the sound is what you'd say. So of these call types, you can expect to see 5 of them here in Ontario. I'm in New York, but where you all are in Ontario. And here you'll see that the types are types 1, which we call the Appalachian Eastern USA call type. Type 2 is ponderosa pine, which is a continent-wide call type. Type 3, Western hemlock. Type 4, Doug fir, which is a rare bird. And then the bird we'll spend the most time on later, which is this type 10, aka type 12, the Eastern red crossbill. And important to note is that you all can make these spectrograms, and I encourage you, if you ever have a sense that you're near a red crossbill, say if you hear birds making that kip kip noise in a pine forest or a spruce forest, take out your phone and record it. And then you're able to actually upload those recordings onto eBird, and you'll see these shapes once you've uploaded those recordings. And then the other thing you can do is, if you know how, you can take those recordings out and send them via email to Matt Young at the Finch Research Network. That's info@finchnetwork.org. I'll type that in the chat a little later. And he will be able to help you identify the call types. But a lot of new folks are now getting involved in crossbill call type identification. And it is something that you're able to pick up if you get a clear enough recording and record enough birds. Some people can even tell them apart by just listening to them. So if we go back 2 slides, you'll notice that all of these, or the first couple of these crossbills, have names. So we have ponderosa pine, western hemlock, Doug fir, lodgepole pine. This is in reference to a key conifer. So what we think is that some of that speciation, or that differentiation between these call types, is happening because some of these types are learning to specialize on specific cones. And so their beaks will grow the shape that is best suited to feed from that specific tree. So a Doug fir crossbill would be able to specialize in feeding from a Douglas fir. Lodgepole pine would feed on lodgepole pine, etc. However, that story is a nice one, but it's actually a slightly more complex story like that. And as I have here, names may deceive. So some of those calls, especially the ones with specific tree names, really focus on conifers in the West. And in the West, you have a lot higher conifer density, but you might have a lower conifer diversity. So you might have these vast elevationally stratified strands of lodgepole pine, ponderosa pine, Doug fir, etc. But here in the East, things are slightly different, where we have a lower conifer density, but a higher conifer diversity. So it helps really to learn about our local conifers and keep tracks of which ones have cones and which ones don't in order to find the crossbills. And so I will actually go in a little bit just to kind of go through the group of conifers that we have here in the East that would be helpful to know if you're looking for crossbills. But first, I'm going to go through just one by one the call types here. I thought it's a bird study group. It could be fun just to get really nitty gritty into the specifics. So even though these birds are nomadic, they actually do have what we call a core zone of occurrence, secondary zone of occurrence, primary zone of eruption, and secondary zone of eruption, which you see here. These core zones of occurrence is where we're most likely to see these birds breeding in a given year. And they're usually there in most years. Secondary zone of occurrence is similar. We frequently, but not always, see the birds there, where the birds are typically rarer there. And then these primary zones of eruption, in the years where there are fewer cones, the birds will then show up there first. And then secondary is where birds who are more strapped for food will go further afield, or also where we expect vagrants to show up. And then one thing I will add is that sometimes this primary zone of eruption, core zone of occurrence movement can almost look a bit like migration. You sometimes will see these semi-regular migrations of crossbills between those 2 spots. So this Appalachian medium bill crossbill eats mainly the eastern white pine and red spruce. It can erupt sometimes, but really you'll most often see it in the Appalachian Mountains, as its name suggests. Its occurrence north into Canada, New England, New York State. It does happen. It's just more rare. And it just predominantly occurs in years where there's very few cones. And so you can see here also, this is the spectrogram for that call type. So moving on, we have the type 2 ponderosa pine red crossbill. This one is most common in the West, and as its name suggests, it it's that with all of those purple zone of occurrence, it's a Western crossbill call type. But at the Finch Research Network, we actually think of type 2 as being more of the eclectic crossbill. It's a large-billed bird, which means that it can eat a variety of hard and soft cones. And that makes it one of the most widespread crossbill call types. So you'll see here a lot of them in the Mountain West. If you record crossbills throughout much of the Mountain West, that's the one you're going to record first. But we have regular breeding birds in the Appalachians, as well as across the Great Lakes, New York and New England. In most years, there'll be type 2s recorded in the crossbill flocks, and they have bred in the area. And then again, of course, during these eruptions, you will frequently see these birds. Now we have type 3, the Western hemlock crossbill. This is a really interesting bird because it's super eruptive, or highly eruptive, we would say. As its name suggests, this is a bird that specializes in the Western hemlock, or that's its key conifer, and it spends most of its time in the West. However, because it's a highly eruptive bird, we do regularly see these birds in the East, where we have our own population of Eastern hemlock. For example, in the winter of 2012, 2013, there were huge numbers of type 3 red crossbills showing up across the East, such as in the coastal Northeast, as well as parts of the Great Lakes states. And when they do show up here, they're going to be using their smaller beaks to feed on some of those smaller coned conifers. Now, this one is just for mentioning. It's a rare bird here in the East, but it does show up pretty regularly as a vagrant. We see it less often than the other crossbills, type 4 Douglas fir, but it is just a good one to have on your radar. You know, when you record a flock of dozens of crossbills flying over, for example, you might even see one or two of these birds mixed in. I remember just 2 years ago, a type 4 red crossbill showed up in Long Island, where I go birding. But you can see here, there's also records in Ontario. So I am saving my favorite for last. This is the bird that I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking on. And we could think of this almost as our hometown crossbill, the type 12 northeastern red crossbill. So this is a medium bill bird, and in fact, it was just announced recently. I don't even know if it's been announced yet. So think of this talk as the first time that we're publicly talking about the type 12 northeastern red crossbill. Before we get into it, I said that I promised a little quick lessons on conifers. I think that a lot of folks have experience with some of these trees, but I'm just going to go through a quick recap of the conifers we have in the East, the ones you can expect crossbills in. So here we have tamarack and eastern hemlock. These are, as you can see, very small cones. And so tamarack is really a favorite of the white-winged crossbill, and then eastern hemlock, you'll see those type 3 red crossbills, and then other red crossbills feeding on when there's cones available. Then we have our both medium cones, and then I'll also lump in here the soft-scaled large cones, which sort of, because of the ease and pliability of the cone, sort of act like softer cones. We have these 3 spruces. So we have the black spruce, which is a favorite of the white-winged crossbill. We also have the red spruce, which is an eastern spruce found most often in places like the Appalachians, Adirondack Mountains, Algonquin. And that's a favorite of both red and white-winged crossbills. We have white spruce, which is a highly boreal tree, favorite of the white-winged crossbill, but will often host red crossbills as well. And then these two, which are more trees for the red crossbill, which is Norway spruce. Even though they're an introduced tree, red crossbills breed at Norway spruce plantations in the East. So especially in eruptions, you'll see red crossbills at the Norway spruces in cemeteries, or some of the big state forests that have been planted, say, in Pennsylvania and New York State. And then the eastern white pine, which, of course, the common and sort of ubiquitous tall pine tree. When you see big stands of eastern white pines with cones, that's a good place to look for our red crossbills. And then to round it all off, we have these harder cone pines. So these are more pines that the birds are going to go for in eruption years. Type 12 red crossbills will go for those red pines when they're available. But then pitch pine, Japanese black pine, Scotch pine, and jack pine are all, for the smaller billed crossbills, not the favorite. They'll show up maybe in eruptions, especially, say, the Japanese black pine, which is abundant on Long Island, or pitch pine, is where we start seeing those type 12 red crossbills in the winter. But then birds like the type 2 red crossbill, which has a really large bill, will regularly feed in all of these trees when it's available. I figured that I've just been showing you pictures of graphs and trees, so here's a photo of some crossbills, just so we can look at them for a little bit. These are 2 red crossbills I photographed at the Adirondack Mountains in New York State. So I told you a bit earlier that we had 11 and now 12 crossbill call types, and that the type 12, the newest red crossbill call type in North America, happens to be from the most populated part of the continent. So you might wonder why or how scientists and birders were able to miss a crossbill call type like that in such a populated area. And the answer is that, well, these crossbills have been documented here for a long time. About 150 years ago, crossbills were regularly documented in the Northeast. There are museum specimens dating from that era of birds collected in the conifer forests of this region. But there was widespread logging in this region that stripped a lot of the forests of their mature conifer trees. And then since then, the birds, red crossbills, became scarce in the northeastern forest. So we do have a lot of these museum specimens that are given a subspecies name. That's Neogea. I think that's how it's pronounced. But we stopped seeing them. Now, the next phase of the story requires us to fast forward 100 years to just about 15 years ago, when biologist Kenneth Irwin realized that there seemed to be a new crossbill call type that was hiding in these coastal Sitka spruce forests of the Pacific Northwest. So he made the official announcement of the type 10 red crossbill in 2010, and he based that on birds whose spectrograms looked a bit like this. So there's a lot of variation here. So I'm going to kind of just go to the overarching, what we identify as type 10s. So on the left, you'll notice that these are just sort of a bit of an upsweep. And then on the right, the first half of that call type looks actually quite similar, with that similar upsweep shape, but then it quickly sweeps back down. So pretty quickly after the announcement of the Type 10, and around the same time, crossbill experts like Tim Spar and Matt Young were noticing recordings of this variant on the right of the crossbill of the Type 10 call type in the Macaulay Library from Cornell. And those recordings were dating back as far as the 1960s, so really as far back as people were recording crossbills. But even though these birds were being lumped in with the Type 10 birds of the West, the birds with these downward sweeps at the end of their calls were all showing up in the East, mostly. I mean, there were birds like that showing up in the West, so it kind of left a bit of confusion. And now things are getting even more interesting in the past 10, 20 years, when birders are increasingly recording these Eastern Type 10 birds. And really almost biennially now, you'll start to see an influx of birds with this sort of down sweeping upside down N shape showing up across the Great Lakes region, as well as across the coastal northeastern US and Canada and the maritime regions of Canada. So folks started wondering that maybe this wasn't a variant of the Type 10 crossbill of the West, but maybe this was its own type here in the East. And so soon, a team of researchers at the affiliated with the Finch Research Network turned to BirdNet. BirdNet is an artificial intelligence program that's used to study and identify birdsong. So they fed a large number of these recordings into BirdNet to analyze them. And what's interesting is that a crossbill call only lasts for, a split second. And so what they had to do is they actually had to slow down these calls and lengthen them so that they were long enough to meet the minimum time requirement to be analyzed by the BirdNet system. So what they did is they didn't use BirdNet to tell them apart, but rather they asked BirdNet to find them different characteristics of these spectrogram shapes that they would then be able to use in order to try and lump them together and see if there really was a difference between these two types. So what they found was that you were actually able to easily group the Type 10 and Type 12 birds into 2 different groups just based on the components of the spectrograms. So again, this upsweeping shape, the downsweeping at the end, and they used a more traditional analysis program for that. So after all of that, after their statistical analysis, the team of researchers were pretty sure that this Eastern bird wasn't just a Type 10 variant, but it was in fact its own crossbill call type. So thanks to all those recordings, we're actually now starting to understand the ecology and the life history of this Type 12 bird. So it seems to be a generalist. specially built for that high conifer diversity, low conifer density that I was talking about here in the Northeast. It breeds in the maritime provinces, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, all the way west to Algonquin in eastern Ontario, as well as the Adirondack region of New York State. And then it also occurs with frequency in eastern New York, in central New York, eastern Massachusetts, as well as parts of the Great Lake region. This past year, it bred in really large numbers where it found appropriate habitat thanks to a bumper cone crop. And now we're actually starting to see this call type, as I said before, regularly moving in response to the approximately biennial cone patterns. So what we really see is then in the autumn, they will travel, especially down coasts of the United States, but they'll turn up at other migratory hotspots as well. And then spend the winters in some of these areas where they can feed on pitch pine or Japanese black pine or Norway spruce, whatever they can find. And so I have on the right a graph of the month of the year versus the tree, and you can see about how often they're feeding on those different trees. Again, you see July, August, September, birds are focusing more on the softer coned white spruce, red spruce, eastern hemlock, tamarack. Then by the autumn, they're going more for eastern white pine. And then by the end of the year, they're going for those bigger cones and harder cones like red pine, jack pine, pitch pine. And then the last thing I'll add, it might look weird to begin a year graph in July, but crossbill researchers typically think of the cone year as beginning around late June, early July, when the green cones start to form on the trees. So I think it's a pretty cool mystery solved. It's almost like the case of the reappearing crossbills. Given the similar ecology of this bird to those Neogea birds that were described by Griscom and Dickerman many years ago, we actually have good reason to believe that these type 12 crossbills that we're starting to see more and more of probably represent a rebounding population of that subspecies that became scarce in the last century. And what's happening is it seems to be responding to the maturation of these conifer forests across the east, as well as federal and state projects that replanted a lot of these forests, as well as better forest maintenance and upkeep practices. And so, pop quiz. Which call type is this? I'm just kidding. I wouldn't make you do that. So, like I said, what we'll be doing is I encourage you all to begin recording crossbills, begin looking for cones, and I really appreciate all the time that you've given me today. And go out looking for crossbills. Any of your big conifer forests, so Algonquin. If you're going to even your local cemetery, any place that you see a bumper crop of cones, it's worth just looking and listening. Please record the crossbills that you find. The more you record them, it was the citizen science recordings of these eastern birds that allowed us to determine that there was this call type hiding in plain sight. So please record your crossbills. If you need help getting them off your phone, we can talk about that later. But otherwise, I really appreciate you all giving me the time to talk about my very favorite bird. FinchNetwork.org is where you can find us and learn more about crossbills. Info@FinchNetwork.org is where you can ask your crossbill questions. And then I've also linked here a crossbills guide to conifers of the northeastern forest. I can drop that in the chat, which you can then use to learn to tell them apart. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a couple of questions, answer a couple of questions that I have here. The first question that I have for Mallory is, has the same level of speciation been observed in white-winged crossbills? So what we've observed is not really, and that's probably because of the more uniform boreal distribution of trees across the boreal, that it really is dominated by some of these white spruces, red spruces, white spruces and black spruces and tamaracks. And so it seems like there might either be more connectivity or just the birds are, they don't seem to have the same level of call type. And then, do I think that the hemlock woolly adelgid will influence hemlock type red crossbill? I think that the answer to that question, so for those who don't know, there's a invasive pest that is attacking the hemlock trees of the eastern forest, and it's quite bad. I don't study this specific interaction or this specific call type, so I can't answer that question exactly, but I'm sure that if there was suddenly a big decrease in the amount of small cone pines that we had, or small conifer cones we had available, it would negatively impact the population of the birds that relied on it.
Okay.
What are the chances of seeing some in the New York City area at this time of year and into the spring? That's a great question. So especially as we're seeing the population of these type 12 birds increase with the maturing of the eastern forests, they are a regular along the coast of the eastern United States and maritime provinces of Canada. So around November, well, in October, when you start to see the crossbills at the white pine is sort of, you see it a little bit more kind of lower altitude, lower latitude. So we'll see white pine a lot in Massachusetts, in New England. So when you start to see a lot of crossbills show up in the white pine in that area, then you can sort of get a good idea that maybe there's going to be some crossbills that show up on the coast. Long Island, the New Jersey coast, Cape May, even down to Delaware, and the coast of Connecticut, Rhode Island, Cape Cod. We consider that to be the primary zone of eruption for the red crossbills, of the type 12 red crossbills. So I have red crossbill on my apartment list here in Brooklyn. Flock flew over my house Thanksgiving weekend last year. We regularly see them at the parks, or at the migratory hotspots, of which there are many in the New York City area. So we have Cape May, Jones Beach, Breezy Point, Central Park. We regularly have crossbills flying over during the month of November into December. And then we'll often have crossbills that'll stick around the whole winter, feeding in the pitch pines of the pine barrens of New Jersey and Long Island. I believe in 2018, crossbills even attempted to nest in the pine barrens, which is March is it's interesting for crossbills to try and nest, these type 12 birds to try nesting in the hard pitch pine of the of Long Island, but they tried. I believe they did not succeed. But yeah, they're not common, and they're not common in they're hard to see in the areas where they erupt because they're unpredictable. But we do try and predict them, and so if you go to a migratory hotspot in a year where the crossbills are erupting, and you go every day, you might have a good shot at seeing them. And then how are they doing in Algonquin Park? Most of my effort is focused in the Adirondacks in the northeastern U.S. because that's where I'm located. I don't get to Canada a lot, so that might be a question. I think eBird would probably be a good place to look for that, or if there's any folks on the call who are maybe involved in any bird atlas work that's being done in Ontario. And I can also take that as a follow-up and ask some of the folks we have, like Tyler Hoare, if he knows. I've got another question. Do crossbills not have a regular breeding season? Are they able to breed year-round? That's a great question. It actually sort of depends a bit on the call type. As I was saying about this type 12 bird, it's interesting that it almost has a somewhat regular breeding schedule as well as movement schedule. Most of them are able to breed year-round. We typically don't see them breeding in the late autumn, especially in the east, just because of the availability of cone crop. But they can breed. Last year I was documenting crossbill breeding in the Adirondack Mountains in February. More often they'll breed in the summertime. So that cone crop year again starts in about July. So the cones will start maturing later. You'll see them about in August. I'm not as familiar with the crossbills of the West, but I'm sure, if you read a lot of these call types, they can breed basically whenever they find a good enough cone crop. And that might be any time of the year. When banding white-winged crossbills, some bills are right and some are left. Does this affect their feeding? Only in that it changes the direction that their head goes while they feed. But there doesn't seem to be a advantage for the left versus right for the crossing of the bill, whether the right crosses over the left or the left crosses over the right. I would have to go log into the Birds of the World account to see what the percentage is, but I do believe somebody has kept a percentage of left-billed versus right-billed crossbills. I don't have that off the top of my head, though.
Okay, looks like questions have tapered off. Well, that was a great talk, Ryan. Thanks so much. Learned a lot about that and know about a number of things, especially the different call types of the crossbills. That's really interesting. I'll have to follow that around here, and hopefully people will be recording them and checking out what the different types are that we have around here. That'd be awesome to know, and we'll be sure to send them off to you so you can add it to your data.
Awesome. Thanks, folks. So I'm just going to drop info at finchnetwork.org is going to be the email you'll send your crossbill call type recordings to. And then I'll maybe send to Jackson later for folks who I use an iPhone, so I can only help with the iPhone, but I can explain how to get the recording off your phone and email it to that email address so you can send your recordings to us.
Okay, sounds fabulous. Yeah, so I'm sure we'll get all that coordinated.
Oh, I actually do have one more question.
Oh, good. Okay, go for it.
I know in Algonquin there are high levels of road mortality due to salt attraction during the winter. Do we see the same impact in New York State? We do see crossbills regularly get hit by cars in the Adirondacks, usually by quick moving motorists who don't see the birds. Those birds are either they are both supplementing their diet with the minerals, so that's why they're so strongly attracted to the salt. Other birds, they also are gritting, so they're eating rocks to help grind up the hard seeds in their gizzards. But yes, we regularly see it. We have found dead crossbills that we'll usually donate to various organizations with permits. It doesn't seem to be having a population issue with the type 12 birds that we have, at least. But it's a really good thing to pay attention to, and obviously keep your encourage people to watch where they're driving and keep their eyes on the side on the road and on the birds on the road. Well, cool. I had a great time.
One more here. One more question, if you're open for it. It says Eve is asking, would you like to comment on the validity of
Kasha crossbill? Yeah. So
Kasha. Okay.
That's a great question also. So there is a crossbill species that was announced just in the past. I don't remember, maybe it was 2017, but we actually do have a third crossbill species not in the eastern United States, in the western United States. The Kasha crossbill is endemic to the South Hills and parts of southern Idaho. It's actually a really interesting story. There are these lodgepole pines that are serotinous. They require fires in order to open up. And these birds developed but the lodgepole pines, in most places, lodgepole pines sort of have this battle with the squirrels. Squirrels go after them, eat up all of the scales, and so the trees have to evolve defenses against the squirrels. But in the South Hills, there aren't any red squirrels, and so Craig Bankman, a crossbill researcher in the West, went and said, that there's no red squirrels there. There's almost certainly an endemic crossbill there, and he went and they found this new crossbill call type 9 in Idaho. They did some research. They did some work on their sort of how they were assorting with other crossbills. They found they almost never interbred with the other call types. And with that and some other information, they declared it its own species. There are blog posts and plenty of folks who feel that there's not been enough evolutionary time that's passed to declare that a valid species. There are plenty of folks who think that, just this year, Kasha crossbills were seen in Colorado and elsewhere. We attribute the Kasha crossbills showing up in Colorado to birds dispersing due to the wildfires in Idaho. In the past couple of years, there were some really intense wildfires, worse than usual, that may have had a negative impact on the Kasha crossbill and would have, driven some birds to leave the South Hills to look for food elsewhere. That's a theory. So I don't know. It's not up to me. It's up to the American Ornithological Committee. Then the folks who decide these things, it's up to them. And in my opinion, I would love to go see the Kasha crossbill in Idaho.
Okay, that looks like it. So again, thanks very much, Ryan, for your time and giving us this great presentation. A lot of people are thanking you and they really liked it, so that's awesome. And hopefully we'll hear more about your work and maybe get you back in a few years' time with some more different information about what you've learned over the years. So thanks again and take care. Okay, bye-bye.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye.
Take care all, and we'll see you at the next general meeting or bird study group meeting in March. Watch for the announcements on the calendar and the newsletter. Take care. Have a good night.